Greetings to you from Lockdown Central for the 23rd time. It's a bit late this episode. It's not on a Tuesday, but whenever you're listening to this, it's no problem. We were in the mountains a bit, and more about that in a later episode. But for today, interesting conversation with Lorinda Pretorius, another lady doing things on the episode, but it's way too cold. This is horrific, the temperatures we are experiencing. So I hope you have a blanket nearby or a cup of coffee. But let's go! Episode 23 of The Guy Doing Things. Get your coffee because you're gonna need it. Great. I think today's episode was one of the first that I actually prepared for. I did research and I read up about it just because I want to know I want to know my stuff speaking to you. Lorinda, welcome to The Guy Doing Things.
Thank you. I feel honored.
We just had a chat beforehand over a cup of coffee, and I realized I'm glad I did a bit of research because later on I'm going to be on your podcast as well.
Yes.
And I did a bunch of research for that. But for The Guy Doing Things, this episode, basically what I want to just go into is where did you get your passion for being so open? So we're going to have a chat about that. I'll ask that later. Because I feel we live in a generation where we can't necessarily be open about things, or when we are open, we're openly being ridiculed as well. So we'll have a chat about that. But first of all, tell us a bit about your background. Where are you from? What did you study, or what are you busy studying?
Okay. When people ask me where I'm from, I find it very hard to answer because I lived all over South Africa. I was technically born in Pretoria, but then I
technically
yes, like it was in the hospital. I was born in a hospital in Pretoria, but I grew up in this small town in Limpopo called Naboomspruit.
Lekker.
Yes,
Yeah.
But then I moved to this smaller town that was much colder in Mpumalanga called Carolina.
Okay.
And then I went to high school in Pretoria. So, yes. And then after that, I went to Cape Town. And after that, I went to Joburg. And I just came back from Finland. So, I mean,
okay,
I'm a citizen of the world.
Yeah, you're everywhere. I couldn't pick up on an accent right now. I was like, what accent is this? But I can hear you. You are all over the place. That's awesome. It's such a cool experience. And then you recently started your own podcast, but more about that later. I want to speak about your Instagram page.
It's great. Go follow me right now.
Just look straight at Lorinda Pretorius.
Yes,
just that.
yes.
Okay. Go do it, please.
It's fun.
I just spoke to you about it, but when I first started reading the stuff you post, I was like, oh no, here we have a ridiculous person. And then when I started reading it, it actually is such a cool platform, and I agree with most of the things going on there. So what made you do it? What made you just start asking or answering super straight up questions?
It's kind of weird. I think it started at the end of 2018. I was doing a Bible school, and I realized, studying the New Testament, that the Bible is so relevant. When you study the history of the Bible, and especially like Corinth and Ephesus and places like that, you realize, oh my gosh, actually everything we're experiencing right now is not new at all. Those cities where like homosexuality was super big back then, the whole gender gender confusion was super huge. Pedophilia was crazy. I mean, a lot of the sexual things that we're struggling with, but also just like greed and violence, and in a way right now it's hidden in a way, but like it's so similar. Like nothing's new under the sun. And so I just realized, oh my gosh, the Bible is actually so relevant to the questions that we have right now.
Yeah.
And when I was doing this discipleship training school a year before, my leaders were really frustrated with me at times because my go-to question was always why.
Yeah.
And so I've always been someone who wanted to understand. Like, if God is saying this, why? Like, but why? Like, what? Why?
Yeah.
It's I want to understand. And then, like, studying the Bible, I was like, oh my gosh, these things are so relevant. So I did a live video, and people sent in some really interesting questions. And because we're studying the Bible, we're able to answer a lot of them. And then a bit later on, I was like, wow, you know, there are things that I talk to my friends about these things all the time. Like, some of my other friends are like, do you ever just like have a chilled conversation? No. Let's talk about life. Like, what's going on? Like, how do you, like, I care about deeper things.
Yeah.
And so I started this thing called Controversial Tuesday.
Yeah.
And so on Tuesdays, I put a controversial topic, or it might just be a relevant topic, like whether it's like right now, maybe it could have been like Black Lives Matter, or like farm murders, or homosexuality, or sex before marriage, or like whatever topic. I would just put the topic with a few kind of like points that people, or questions. Prompts. Yes.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you don't do that, people don't know what to answer.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, so share your thoughts. And then I just shared the thoughts that people put there anonymously without any of my own comments.
Yeah.
And then I got all these messages from, like, random people, like, that went to high school with me that, like, we're not friends anymore, or other people I've never met, and people are just like, oh, we love this. Like, thank you so much for creating a platform where we can discuss the things that we're all thinking. Yeah. And I think throughout my life, this has always been a theme for me, being the one speaking out for people who weren't willing to, or saying things that everyone was thinking, but weren't like brave enough, or they didn't want to say it out loud.
Yeah.
So that's always kind of been my role. And so from there, I started doing Q&As, and as I progressed and kind of like refined my calling, which, I mean, I guess we'll later on discuss it, but like I'm very passionate about God's design for sexuality, and like I'm an aspiring sexologist, so
we'll definitely talk about that later.
Those things, so as I progressed in what I know God called me to, I did more research on it. I spent all my free time reading on it, and then I did more and more Q&As on it, and I just realized that people really want honest answers, or they want a space where they can ask things without judgment or shame.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like my main mission, is to create a space without shame. Like, no matter what you ask or what you're struggling with, I'm not there to judge you. I am there to walk with you if you're willing to. Yeah. Because Jesus always meets us where we're at.
Yeah.
But he just loves us too much to leave us there.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like my mission with that, because I also just think there's way too much shame linked to like sexual sin or sexual questions within the church, which really like hinders people from growth. Yeah. Because if I can't ask my like Sunday school leader, like, oh my gosh, I think I'm like attracted to the same sex, or like I have a boyfriend and I know, okay, I shouldn't have sex before marriage, but like, what about the rest? Like, is a handjob sex? Like, why can't we have this conversation? Why is it? It's not supposed to be shameful, because then we can't get help or guidance or leadership in those areas. You know. Yeah.
That's so cool. I just noticed that awesome things happen on Tuesdays, because it's the guy doing things Tuesdays.
And Wednesdays.
I'm sneaking that in now. But it's so cool that you do that. We need platforms like that. And some people might ask, what does this have to do with the guy doing things? You know, what am I doing? What I'm actually doing is, and this is not 30 days doing MMA. This is 1 hour speaking to someone super openly without any filters or whatever. And that is something that I think we need as a society. A few episodes back, I spoke to Fred Kortzer, and he loves just enabling people to have conversations. I've heard a quote saying, the worst thing for people about Christianity is Christians or Christians. And that's
True.
Terrible. I mean,
it's sad, but
that's
it's
so
true.
terrible. And the way that you are shaping this now is so cool. I mean, I can't imagine going to my Sunday school teacher asking him about, very controversial topics. But you make it so openly. And I think doing that opens the door to conversation. And it opens the door for much more people to come into church and experience that for themselves. I think because that's the problem that most people have with the faith, is that the people who practice it are a bit rigid in their thinking. So it's really cool. Let's go to calling. Let's do that. I'm gonna dive right into calling because I love it that you mentioned it. So what do you think? What do you think your purpose is? What do you think? Despite just answering questions, what do you hope to achieve with that? What do you think is your ultimate goal in life and goal with what you are doing?
I think right now, well, for the season, my calling is definitely to bring Jesus back into the conversation around our sexuality.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that language too, because I'm all for conversations. I really believe that conversations will and can change the world, because ideas change the world. And when we are open in a conversation where we allow ourselves to learn from other people and not, we don't go with the goal to convince or educate them.
Wow.
A lot of times we can then share our ideas, and they can learn from us, but we can also learn from them.
Yeah.
And so that's basically that is my goal. With this platform, but also in the future, hopefully speaking at events. If you want someone to speak about Jesus and sex, call me. I'll speak to your church or your youth ministry.
You'll definitely have a book out soon, and please make the title very, very controversial. Just make the title of the book something like Jesus and Sex, because it will sell. I promise you, it will sell.
So I just want to bring him back into the conversation, because if we, Jesus, I just listened to a short preaching this morning from a friend, and it was on Romans, and like this verse in Romans that I can't remember the chapter or verse number, but it's like something like, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it has the power to transform people," or something like this. I remember this verse, and I'm just like, this is so true. You know what? Like, there are people saying we can't say Jesus is the only hope, because if your hope doesn't, if your definition of hope doesn't give hope to people who don't believe in Jesus, then like, I'm sorry, but you're not doing your job. And I'm like, listen, you don't get it. Jesus is the only hope. Yeah. Like, he's the only one who can transform us. But Jesus never pushes himself on other people.
Yeah.
He just wants us to invite him to the conversation. Because the moment we do that, there is such a big opportunity for him to transform our own views and our own lives. And through my story and the experiences I've had with my own sexuality throughout high school, when I look back at it, if one person took the time to have a conversation with me and to invite Jesus into it, whether I was a pretty rebellious and like feminist and completely left liberal teenager, but And that's why I'm saying inviting Jesus into the conversation instead of bashing me with the Bible.
Yeah.
If you invited Jesus into the conversation I had with myself about my sexuality, it could have spared me so much hurt.
Yeah.
Because Jesus only wants, like, he just needs you to open the door 1 centimeter.
Yeah.
He doesn't even need you to open the door fully, because his love is just so transformative.
Yeah. Let's go to a controversial topic. That's something that I encountered when I was in university as well. Is that once you just start mentioning the name, if you say Jesus, I think some people maybe have put off the podcast already just by listening to that.
Yeah.
How do you open that conversation? People who don't believe in him, who say, you take your God and you go and do your little church thing on another side. How do you think we engage those people? Where's the inclusivity when it comes to our faith? I think you already touched a bit on it when you mentioned, you open up the questions to anything, because I don't think it's only Christian people answering the questions. It's a bunch of people answering, and they don't necessarily all believe the same. But where do you think we can start the conversation there to make the name a bit more approachable?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, which I've gotten quite a few times. Actually, the thing is, though, like, I don't think people will like my answer, or I think it's like a classic answer. But in my experience, being Jesus to people is what opens the conversation.
Yeah.
So I can give you this example. I went to Finland at the beginning of the year, and Finland is a very it's a great country. Love it. People don't really believe in Jesus, especially in the main city where I was in Helsinki. And I was very open about my faith because I just generally am, and because it's on my Instagram, it's really hard to like people know. People know
yeah.
I believe
it's hard
in Jesus.
not to have that conversation.
People, yes. But here's the thing, though. I try my best, and of course I'm not perfect at it, but I try my best to love people well. And like one of my favorite verses from a song that I actually really want to get a tattoo of is, it says like, lead me in your love to those around me.
Yeah.
And I've just found that is the simplest, the hardest, and the best way to live. Because, yes, I'm very open about my faith, because especially I was studying social sciences, and so when we talk about worldview, I often mention that I am Christian, because I'm like, oh, yeah, well, from my worldview, which is based on Christianity, so I believe people are inherently evil. I don't think, like, there will ever be, like, a city or country that's not corrupt or something like this. Like, when you discuss social sciences, when you define where you're coming from in terms of your worldview, it helps people to understand.
Yeah.
And so it often came up in that way, not specifically discussing Jesus. Yeah. But then, just because I loved them well, I was actually surprised how many people came to me and asked me about God. And they were like, hey, like, I actually have a bunch of questions. Like, could I ask you? And I was like, yeah, sure. Or another girl sitting next to me in the library, and she was like, hey, so I saw your Instagram, and, like, I hear you talking, and, like, it's so cool that you're open about your faith. Like, people aren't like that here, and and it turns out she's a Christian. I was like, I never would have thought that. Not in a million years. And and then we had this really good conversation about, like, how faith should guide your entire life. Or when I'm at UJ, which is where I study, I often speak out in classes. I'm that one white girl who speaks a lot. So a bunch of people know me.
We all know that girl. Yeah.
Yes. I often come with like weird ideas, and I don't necessarily mention Jesus a lot. But so many times people come to me and ask me a few people came to me and they're like, "You're just so kind. Like, why? Or like, where do you get this like weird worldview or this ideas?"
Yeah.
And so I just naturally mention Jesus a lot because it's really impossible for me to talk about my life and completely taking him out of it because it's so intertwined with him. Not in like a highly religious way. It's just like, oh, how do you know you want to go into sexology? Well, I prayed about my calling and like Jesus showed me. Wait, what? It's just very intertwined. Or like I was part of a missionary organization for 2 years. So whenever people ask me like, what did you do then? Oh, I was part of a missionary organization. So like, are you Christian? Yeah.
Yeah, it always comes into the
Jesus
conversation.
Jesus is a very, yes. Yeah. But I never, a lot of times when it comes to Christianity, I never open the conversation. Like, I might mention that I love Jesus or I'm Christian, but I won't go into the conversation unless they want to. Yeah. But they 90% of the time want to. So why do you believe in Jesus? Like, I don't believe there's any God. Oh, interesting. I think you also believe there's not a God because there's nothing like, there's no 100% proof for Jesus, but there's also not 100% proof that there's no God. So actually we both have
something.
We both have faith.
Yeah.
You believe in nothing and I believe in Jesus.
That's so cool that you said that.
Yes. Yeah. And so, or when it comes to sexuality or like any of those things, like I once had a conversation and someone was like, "Oh, but don't your gay friends like feel like projects?" And I was like, "What are you even saying?" Like, I never talk to my gay friends about their sexuality. Like, I never bring it up because it's your life. Like, live your life. The only time I will ever have that conversation is if they bring it up. Yeah. It's not my job to initiate this conversation. It's not my job to change you. Yeah. Only Jesus can do that. Yeah. Do they know what my thoughts are? Yes, because again, like, I'm very open about it on Instagram. But I just love them well as people.
Yeah. I think that's a cool thing that you said that. And I love the way that you handle the question. Just because you get people that go out, and I don't know if you mentioned it in this conversation or previously, but it's not about Bible bashing. It's not about going out and, with a banner that says we are all doomed, whatever. That's not bringing people closer. So I think for people listening and for people who want to move into this space, using what you're doing is brilliant. I mean, it will naturally just come up in the conversation when you live a Jesus-filled life, but it's not about enforcing it. It's not about trying to imprint it on other people, and that's awesome. For the guy doing things, our time is up. But how do we continue the conversation? Where can people go to continue? You have your own podcast, so please just tell us a bit about that. They can follow you at Lorinda Pretorius, and obviously they can hire you to go and speak.
Yes, you're welcome. So my podcast is called the Chasing Something Podcast. It is specifically
such a cool name. Love it.
It's for Christian young adults, and I just have conversations with friends and experts and all different kinds of people about relevant topics. So anything from toxic masculinity to boundaries and dating, or really anything that influences your life as a Jesus follower. So you can please subscribe to that podcast.
And if they're not Christians, is there something for them as well?
If you're not a Christian, you can still follow me on Instagram. I actually just got a message from a friend I met in Finland who's not Christian. He was like, "Yeah, every now and then I think about unfollowing you, but then I learn something, so then I choose not to do it." Oh, that's cool. I also have a blog called The Chasing Something, or chasingsomething.org. So if you go to my Instagram, you will see everything that I do. And everything is, like I said, influenced by Jesus. But a lot of these conversations we can still have even if you don't believe in Jesus. Because certain things I believe we're all against racism, or not for people exploiting the poor or the weak, and like a bunch of these type of conversations will also feature on the podcast.
Yeah.
So whether you believe in Jesus or not, I'm sure there are certain values that we have in common, and you will benefit, or at least it will be an interesting perspective, even if that's just so you can convince Christians to not be Christian. I don't know. But, you can learn from anyone.
Yeah. Awesome. Lorinda, thank you so much for your time. If people want to listen more about this or about our conversation, they can actually just switch over to your podcast now, because we're going to do a whole conversation there. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you for what you're doing. I really dig it. It's so cool. And all the best with your podcast and your journey ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Lorinda. And we'll catch you next time for the adventure episode once more. Talking about everything, hiking, everything outdoors. And a special guest. So we'll catch you on the flip side. Until then, stay warm and stay safe. This was the guy doing things. Goodbye.